Hey, folks, welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as we always do, a reminder that when we say go green, we don't mean mere environmentalism. We talking about deep ecology. We talking about a recognition that we are all interconnected in this web of life. And whether you come at that from a hard science perspective, or you come at it from a deeply eco-feminist spiritual perspective, or like me, you say those are both absolutely valid ways of understanding the world, make no mistake about it. Whatever we do to that web of life, we are ultimately doing to ourselves. And right about now, y'all, it's becoming increasingly obvious we're doing it wrong. And I mean all of it. I mean industrial society. I mean capitalism. I mean white supremacy. I mean capitalism. I mean we are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. And on that cheery note, let's welcome co-host Shane Knight. Hey Shane, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right, Dave. Good to see you, man. How you been?
Man, I'm good. Well, looky here, man. You know it, so I'm gonna let our audience know. I'm at my mama's place right now. Yesterday we had the Cobb Claunch family reunion in Central Texas, so I'm feeling particularly rednecky. And as everybody knows who knows me, I am a proud and unabashed mama's boy. I absolutely love and adore my mama. So much about who I am is because of how she raised me and how my mama and papa raised me. As you know, Shane, mama, papa, that's Southern for grandparents,
That's
right?
right. That's right. Yeah.
So get this, Shane, my Aunt Mary and Uncle Robert come in from Mississippi, right?
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
so we had people from all over. So I'm as happy as a pig in shit right now, and happy to have this conversation.
Well, I can't believe you're that happy. I get it, being with family but the world around us is still falling apart, and I'm having a rough time.
Well,
It
you know
just
what?
keeps getting worse.
It does, doesn't it? Well, luckily we've got a friend who helps put stuff into perspective, don't we?
That's right. Little Miss Mel Figueroa over at the Democracy Collaborative, putting together the Tracking the Crisis for us, was kind enough to do again for us what she did last week so very well. She's given us a little short video with a couple of headlines to go through real quick, so I'm just going to bring that up right now, and we can listen to what Mel has to tell us is going down in the world. How about that? Well, there it goes. There we go.
Welcome to this week's Tracking the Crisis, a weekly news roundup of Trump administration actions and movement responses. On Thursday, April 24th, Trump signed 7 new executive orders targeting U.S. education systems. In higher education, Trump took aim at the college accreditation process. 2 of the orders aim to reverse Obama and Biden-era civil rights guidance based on statistical evidence of racial disparities in tracking and student discipline. Another order boosting the use of AI in K-12 schools was touted by Trump. Many institutions see these orders as another assault on Trump's war on DEI in schools, where the courts have ruled against Trump in recent days. The American Association of University Professors referred to the orders as removing educational decision-making from educators and reshaping higher education to fit an authoritarian political agenda. Philanthropic leaders have called for nonprofits to stand together against any potential assaults on activist and community organizations. The coalition of 75 civil rights groups have signed a unity pact to defend each other against any threats from the Trump administration or GOP-controlled Congress. Over 220 higher education leaders signed a letter denouncing the Trump administration's interference that is endangering higher education in America. Following a call from Rutgers 2 weeks ago, faculty and university senates at several Big Ten universities have passed resolutions to push their administrations to form a mutual defense pact that would pool resources towards resisting pressure from the federal government. That's it for this week's Tracking the Crisis. Read more by signing up for our weekly news roundup, delivered to your email inbox every Friday at trackingthecrisis.org. Back to you, David and Shane.
Thanks, Mel.
Mel Figueroa. I like the tagline, Shane. She reads the news so we don't have to.
Makes life easier, doesn't it? I tell you.
Looky here, I do want to just riff on this notion of the attack on education. You know, one of the things, first of all, let me always lift up public school teachers. I've never met a public school teacher who went into that profession for fame, for glory, certainly not for money. They go into that profession because they want to help children mature into adults, how to become productive members of society. We should honor education and public teachers. And at the same time, deeper still, the most important thing that any human child learns how to do is how to walk and how to talk. And in the corporatized education system, the first thing that they're taught is sit down and shut up. To me, the attack on education feels like another example of how Donald Trump is a burgeoning fascist. This is a direct attack on the democratic sensibilities of this country. And we need to take this seriously. And Shane, I'm going to invite you. If you feel like I'm going too far, help me see it different.
No, I totally agree. Like, you don't like my music? Nice handle there. Said, teaching is the noblest profession. So there's a quote from Socrates, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I can tell you from personal experience, the memories and all of the growth experiences that I've had in my life are largely due to, teachers. I sought them out from a young age, and the impact that it's had on my life has been very substantial. And I've seen it on other people's lives play out the same. There is I like the whole attack on public education is, I don't know, part of me feels like it's an attack on people's, or like it's the freedom of autonomy. And it is authoritarian. And it is getting worse and worse. And that's one of the reasons that at Democracy at Work, one of the things that we're getting ready to gear up to start doing is education doesn't have to be in a brick and mortar school. It doesn't have to have gowns and caps. Education, can be delivered to you by a quote unquote professor or a legitimate professor. The classroom doesn't matter, right? It's the delineation of knowledge. It's the passing of knowledge from one to the other. And at Democracy at Work, we're getting ready to start a whole new series of classes that are going to be led by a variety of professors and other experts and professionals in and around I would say specifically economics, but also social justice, some psychology, a little bit of business, but it's going to be an interesting ride. And I'm, if this is where we got to go with education, we're fine with it and making strides in setting up something that's going to replace anything that they're going to try to take over.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for that. And I am also honored to be part of the resistance. The fact that there is now a unity pact coming out by 75 of the largest nonprofits. But even deeper, I have to say, there are literally millions of us who are part of the resistance. And our guest today is one of those examples. Jasmine Banks is joining us today. Jasmine is a queer Black feminist mother, a cultural strategist, a strategist, a movement organizer. Her work is at the intersection of care, resistance, and collective memory. I had the great privilege of being a guest on her program, Parenting is Political. And if you're not yet subscribing to that, you should. And I want to, at this point, just welcome Jasmine Banks to the conversation. Hey, Jasmine.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all.
So look at here. You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last 6 months or so. I've been really impressed. And I'm not blowing sunshine up your ass, Jasmine, when I say your ability to cut to the chase, to like your clarity of thinking, and you bring a little salt and sugar to the conversation. So I really have appreciated it. I'm going to invite you. You heard this opening line, right? And so I want to give you the time and the space to introduce yourself to our guests. You can go as deep as you want. You can get as personal as you want. But Jasmine Banks, as a social change agent, you've got an interesting trajectory to come onto a program called Redneck Gone Green. So I'm going to invite you to share, who the heck are you, lady?
Well, I always joke that I became sort of like a national nonprofit executive director by accident. I think a lot of queer Black women are bamboozled into that, but ultimately my journey around social justice was woven throughout my developmental process as a young person, but I didn't know that you could go into this as a career. And I also didn't know about a larger struggle outside of my experiences growing up in an African-American family. But, I had a grandmother who was a part of the Eastern Stars and was incredibly important to her community. She was a home health care provider and a care worker. She fought to get the Native American and immigrant populations in Oklahoma access to school buses. And that was, a part of her history of being a Jim Crow survivor and a lynching survivor as well. And so I wouldn't have called those things political. I thought that was just sort of what it meant to be African-American and Native in the world. But eventually, I found my way into the nonprofit industrial complex, thinking that that's where I was going to affect change. And back during the Ferguson years, at the very beginning of the uprising, I volunteered with a group of other writers and influencers to go to Ferguson to help clean up the library after the militarized police attacked everyone and destroyed everything. And I really found myself becoming more and more radicalized and landed here in this interesting, holding this space between genuine grassroots movement work that is not paid, that is about us wanting to realize, a future for our people and our planet. And then also, having a 9-to-5 job that is a part of the nonprofit industrial complex and understanding this sort of like insurgent strategy to the containment system of nonprofit and philanthropy world. But yeah, that's the high level. Outside of the work, nonprofit nonsense, I'm a mom of 4 and I've got a beautiful Black trans daughter. We're an interracial, secular, humanist, queer family, and we relocated almost 3 years ago as political refugees to DC because of the work we did for frontline communities, particularly around slowing the assault on affirming care for trans kids in Oklahoma. And yeah, I've done a lot of different movement stuff, whether it's restorative justice to grassroots movement building to narrative and cultural organizing work. So I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I don't know if it's just who I am as a person or my ADHD, but either way, it's been an adventure.
Well, as another ADHD kid, I definitely appreciate that. I also appreciate, Jasmine, that you specifically talked about the Ferguson as an uprising, and you did it casually, but also clearly, and you talked about being radicalized. Mm-hmm. I want to take this moment to unpack both of those, because even saying it the way you did so naturally in a storytelling way, I deeply appreciated it, and I want to lift it up and again interrogate that a little bit. Yeah. Why did you say that Ferguson was an uprising?
Well, I mean, the socio-geopolitical context was, Mike Brown and what happened in Florissant was one thing on top of so many other things that had happened around police presence and oppression and the enclosure of African-American Black community outside of St. Louis. And the uprising was that community, and then globally those who were in solidarity with all of us, saying this kind of state-sanctioned violence that is just run of the mill that so many people have become accustomed to, that they don't even think about what the implications were when Mike lost his life the way that he did, was a resistance movement, right? There were people in the street saying this will not stand. And it was one part of a bigger moment that of course led to really historical uprisings and reckonings like the George Floyd protests and mobilizations. The reason why I say radical is because it's just grasping at the root of something, right? Like, I had grown up in a time where I believed in Obama and I believed in the possibility that religious institutions or civil society institutions could be the places where change happened. And post Ferguson, what I really saw happen, particularly with the neoliberal places and spaces that I was adjacent to, was that there was actually no real intention from some of these actors and institutions to transform the systems and to get us out of these systems that are designed to kill us, whether they're social systems or actual structural systems. And that pushes you to look for real solutions that transform and no longer invite you into the same systems that are killing you or try to contain you. And yeah, Ferguson was one kind of stop on a, I'd say like 7-mountain journey to go deeper into understanding the root of what really is happening in the United States and where that anti-Blackness, where that settler colonial, psyche, like how it all started and took hold, and then what are the actual solutions to undermining it and building new systems.
Thank you so much. You did not disappoint, Jasmine. I am reminded, so many people sanitize Martin Luther King Jr. and try to de-radicalize him and his work. But the phrase that is coming to mind at the moment is, a riot is the language of the unheard. That is a powerful and poignant statement that King made in response to the Watts riots or uprising in Los Angeles in 1965. And that uprising erupted due to the same kind of long-standing systemic, not just racial discrimination, but state-sanctioned violence and murder. Let's be very clear. Michael Ferguson was murdered by the police. So this is not to condone a violent response, but is to acknowledge that that level of state-sanctioned murder is violent. In addition to that, the level of poverty is violence. The level of patriarchal power over dominating systems, these systems are in fact violent themselves. And for me, I think it's important that we just, in plain talk, as my dear friend and comrade Kali Akuno sometimes says, break it down without dumbing it down. Just use plain talk and language. And the reality is, it was an uprising. It was a justifiable uprising. And so the fact that Ferguson happened and the fact that it was clamped down the way it was and ultimately undermined, I would argue, by the neoliberal forces, instead of continuing to escalate and make demands to tamp it down. You saw that up close and personal, didn't you, Jasmine?
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it in so many other ways, but I think that we have these conversations around what's violence and nonviolence, and you evoked Martin. And I have an interesting relationship with the legacy of the King family. But I think that what folks don't, because the state has done such a good job of making itself invisible, right? And rebranding and propagandizing its actual violence. But the people in Ferguson were dealing with incarceration, surveillance, like militarized repression. And it really, we can't look at it any other way than saying that the state violence is to protect existing power structures, not their communities. And what we saw was that community demanding dignity and self-determination. And whenever we make space for people to have self-determination, when we begin to talk about what's appropriate and what's fair for a response, then we're doing exactly what the state does, right? Which says that like your right to self-defense only is allowed to exist within a certain kind of list of approvable behaviors. And I don't think that's how struggle for your own freedom and your own safety and self-determination works. So yeah, there were protesters and folks that were getting physical with the cops and defending themselves. And I think that was an appropriate response that was less violent, actually, than what the state was already doing.
Again, the state's response to what began as just accumulated frustration and grief on the streets to say stop, hands up. This again, the state repression and the militarized response using and deploying military grade equipment and hyper aggressive tactics against demonstrators, like this drew at the moment the kind of criticism, but it really is worth pointing out the neoliberal forces circled around the state and undermined those of us who were trying to again escalate our calls for justice. I think that's important to name.
And the state violence wasn't a glitch. Like it wasn't that the Black population and the poor population outside of St. Louis are somehow more violent and more in need of a militarized response. It wasn't a glitch. It was literally the system working as it was intended to maintain that racial capitalism and colonial power. And, you know, we know that true safety and freedom require community-based alternatives. And one way that you can engage in a tactic or a tool of community care is what we saw on the ground. Thousands and thousands of people coming from all over the world to mobilize, to surround a community that experienced a really, really awful murder right in front of them. And that young man laid in the street for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, that was a powerful radicalizing moment. And I've had other small moments as a mom, moments whenever, you know, I was newly pregnant and learned that Black women and poor women in Arkansas are drug tested at a higher rate whenever they go in to get a positive pregnancy test. And the immediately sort of like the criminality and the policing and surveilling of even just one of the most tender parts of us as human beings, which is like our building our families. But yeah, they've been countless over my life because of my queerness and my Blackness, growing up homeless and working poor. And then just realizing that every time I tried to engage in this system of meritocracy where people were like, if you just graduate high school, if you just get a college degree, if you behave this way, and then it just wasn't panning out. I've always been one of those young people that really wanted to figure out the puzzle and wanted to do it fast. Like I'm your pinch hitter in a escape room because I'm going to figure out how to get out real quick. But the escape room of settler colonial racial capitalism that I was born into, I'm like, how I can't eject. And then slowly realize that you can't eject by design. And so there has to be other systems and other alternatives that are being built that you're living into.
So I'm going to pick up on that trajectory that you just described, Jasmine, and ask you to walk us through the experience at Uncoke My Campus and all the work that you've done there, because frankly, you've got a pretty impressive body of work. So I want you to walk us through Uncoke My Campus, how you as an individual got involved with that, what you did through that.
Well, it was really, I don't know, like some kind of comedic situation. I always joke that if there's a God, that God has a really weird sense of humor when it comes to how I end up in places and spaces. But I had been working as a digital organizing fellow for NARAL Pro-Choice America, which has since changed its name to Reproductive Freedom for All. And that was during the Hillary years. And, Ferguson had already happened. And so I was in this process of discovering and developing a more refined level of critical consciousness and political awareness. And so it was really, really hard being in a predominantly white feminist space, even, in the nonprofit layers, of course, as well. But I ended up being a pain in their ass, essentially, and kept wanting to do campaigns calling attention to the fact that Black women were incarcerated during childbirth, and when they're incarcerated, they're shackled and they're like held down. And they kept saying, no, that wouldn't make sense to our list. Just in another, email about The Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that. Anyway, they found a good reason to fire me. They said I engaged in reverse racism because one time during a staff retreat, I said that I played roller derby because I like to hit white women and not go to jail. And I was really burnt out with the nonprofit nonsense and the neoliberal liberal nonsense. And I responded to a request for proposal that Lindsay Berger, one of the co-founding and the first executive director of Uncoke My Campus, had listed. They wanted someone who had digital skills, who could build out a true digital grassroots campaign for some of the legacy work that had already been happening. So I said yes in late 2017 to being the digital organizer for Uncoke. And I worked for them for 8 months before the organization started, struggling. Young people who had been given unrestricted grant funds, and they had been initially fiscally sponsored through Greenpeace and kind of passed around. I was like, y'all need to shit or get off the pot, because this is really important work and I'm in it if y'all are in it, but I need some clear leadership. And so Lindsay was leaving. She left and went to the Union of Concerned Scientists, and the other co-founders weren't necessarily motivated to lead the organization. And I felt like at that point, all of the multiple overlapping threats that Koch Industries and Charles and David Koch from their philanthropic ventures were posing to us as a people, like working class people, Black folks, queer folks, that I couldn't just let it languish. And so the co-founders appointed me executive director of Uncoke My Campus. And so I led that work from 2018 up until December of 2024, where I transitioned it from being a fiscally sponsored project into a programmatic priority of my new organization. But our work primarily was to help seed narratives and provide information to student activists, to faculty activists who really didn't understand that it's more than just corporate donations controlling higher education. It was a very explicit strategy to capture and create insurgent ideological production factories that served the Koch network and the American Legislative Exchange Council. And that one way that we could kind of throw some sand in the gears of the far right libertarian apparatus was slowing their capture of higher education, because that's what they were using to legitimize really, really unpopular ideas. And kind of creating this ideological pipeline that started in higher education, moved over to think tanks, then moved over to their lobbyists, and then on to their pay-for-play politicians that they had implanted inside of state, local, and national government. So yeah, it's been interesting. At one point, Charles Koch said, "I don't know why they're trying to uncoke the campus. I'm not trying to unmarx the campus." And I thought, what a weirdo that you think you're in like diametric opposition to Karl Marx. How could you think, like, what? Yeah. And we've been targeted. We've got the Breitbart guys and all kinds of false flag operations. And they've put one of our co-founder in a cartoon on Prager University. I never thought that my work would be throwing rocks at billionaires and being a thorn in Charles Koch's side, but it is in fact the work that I do. Yeah, some of it at least.
Well, my mama used to say you can be judged by the friends you have. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "I ask you to judge me by the enemies I have made." So I want to just sort of lift up both my mama and FDR. Good work, Jasmine. If you are throwing rocks at billionaires and they feel the need to defend themselves, you must be pretty good at it. And it does. One of the things that I've picked up from you is the ability that you have for digital storytelling and telling stories that make sense and resonate with people. And you engage both visually, you engage poetically. Some of the work that you're doing, I feel like, is like this I feel like a dinosaur recognizing a mammal, right? Like that is clearly going to replace me, but I don't quite understand exactly what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more of my neurodivergence. I'm able to really identify algorithms and patterns. And probably the ways that I've healed from my complex post-traumatic stress disorder makes me really hyper attuned to when temperatures are changing. And if you are a lover of words and narrative in the way that I am, you'll notice when tides start changing in conversations online. And so, yeah, I've had a giftedness for it, but I've always been really precocious. In kindergarten, my first book that I read for my book assignment was The Prophecies of Nostradamus, and they called my mom and they were like, she's lying. There's no way that she read that. And my mom was like, oh, she's been reading since she was like 3 or 4. So yeah, my mom was like, open one of the chapters and quiz her on what it was. And yeah, and then the teacher thought I was maybe demon possessed, because why would a kindergartner choose Prophecies of Nostradamus? But yeah, words and stories and the humanities have always been core to who I am as a person and how I think that we have to affect change in the world. And then of course I was a poor kid who went around everybody's mailbox and stole those AOL free internet CDs. And then my friend and I had found a computer and got it working. And so we had hundreds of these free AOL hours, and I would go into chat rooms that I probably had no business to be in, and learned about like coding and online forums, and was just really captured by the internet before it turned into a corporate cesspool enclosure. But yeah, I kind of straddled old technology and the development of new technology, and have taken to all of it with a decent proficiency.
So from the Uncoke My Campus, you basically evolved, grew, nurtured that into Generation Common Good. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So during lockdown, like many people, I was listening to our base, our organizers and activists, and it became a difficult thing because we had students who want to do cops off campus work. We had wage workers that during lockdown inside of the campus weren't getting paid or didn't have PPE the way that they needed or deserved. And it became clear that we were entering into this season. I thought it would be a short season. It is not, of polycrisis, right? And so when you're thinking of yourself as an organizer, one of the critical tools that you have to use is translating change and the story of change, or the story of the problem and what the solution is, in a way that resonates with people. And frankly, we're in lockdown, students aren't on campus, workers are struggling, the uprising with George Floyd and the racial reckoning is starting to unfold. No everyday working class person is gonna be like, yes, I would love to hear your elevator pitch about a billionaire and why he should not be in charge of the grant agreements inside of my college. Thank you so much. I'm not being paid a fair wage. And so I started doing all these listening sessions with our ecosystem. And what they said was, we want a political home. We want to continue disrupting the Coke network, but there are other problems that are attached to the Coke network and how they're winning and out organizing us. And we need a place for that. And so we developed.
But before you do that, I because I love how you do it on the website, and I really, this I hope will be considered a setup, because I love how on the website you lay out, this is the problem, this is the solution, this is the plan. So for listeners, readers, and folks who are listening on the podcast of Redneck Gone Green, I'm going to invite you to say, okay, what's the problem? What's the solution? What's the plan?
Yeah. So the problem is that private and wealthy interests have captured and undermined education, public education, as a common good for all of us, right? They've corporatized it and have been using it for their own interests. The solution is that we organize mass movements and an ecosystem of leaders that want to defend education as a common good for all of us. And our plan is to create a home or a container for those people who want to advance pro-education, pro-democracy, and pro-climate solutions on whatever their context is, whether it's state, local, or national, that they're resourced and that they have a formation to advance those solutions. So we're in year 1, so we're building out our membership and doing a lot of political education and kind of building out the connective tissue of that.
And what I loved is that you got very concrete with it. You said, we want 5,000 committed social change agents. So I don't mean to be pushy, but I do like genuinely inquiry, like, so how's that going? Because one of the things that I've seen from you is that you are not merely just talking to the ideological left. You talking to like ordinary folk and getting them involved.
Yes, it's going great. So after the People's March that we were an organizational anchor of, we were able to activate relationships with over 250 people. We do a lot of small cohort training. So we've launched our second cohort process and are bringing on our second round of fellows. And we usually do 5 to 10 of core fellows at a time, with the understanding that they'll at least have touch points with 3 other organizers that they mentor and build relationship and bring along. But yeah, so we'll have, I think, our first solid 20 core leaders of that 5,000. And it is a slow and intentional process, because it's not, it's not the 3.5 rule, and it's not all these other buzzwordy metrics. It's true long-term relationship building and helping folks understand the context of the struggle that we're in, and that it's a protracted one. But yeah, I mean, we've got a huge database. We've got 11,000 folks on our database, plus more than that. And then we've got over 500 folks who have said, like, threw their name in the hat and say they want to be a part of it. But we're really, really intentional about how we onboard people and bring them in. But yeah, this is.
And that's, again, this is what I mean about how excited I get when I talk to you as both a theorist and a strategist, and just breaking it down without dumbing it down. So when I hear you talk, what I hear is being very intentional and deliberate about onboarding people, building a scaffolding, helping them understand so that they're not just reactive. I get so tired of the social media world where it seems like it's just attention economy and likes and clicks and so forth. And it's like, okay, I get it that you want to expand your reach, but what are you doing with the folks that you reach? And what I hear in Generation Common Good is an old style relationship building plan to build other social change agents. And that, lady, is what excites me when I hear you laying it out. Like, that is a plan that makes sense.
Well, all of the folks who contributed to the development of our 5-year strategy, all of the folks on our board, all of the folks who advise us, we all are seasoned inside of the nonprofit industrial complex, but we know it is inherently a counterinsurgent container, right? Like, we know it exists to depoliticize and to contain us. And one way that it does that is it activates new folks around issues that are completely valid, and sometimes with rage, sometimes with hope, all these different whatever marketing and narrative schemes, right? But then it's extractive. They're like, just show up and do this lobby day or do this thing, and then that's it. And then so you have these waves of folks that could become a part of a genuine populist movement, but they're being discarded and thrown out by these national nonprofits that really just need their number, not who they are and what they bring to the movement. And, when we were doing our landscape analysis and we were doing all these listening sessions, that's one of the things that we kept hearing from folks was just like, we learned about movements in the 60s and 70s and 80s where people had political homes, but that doesn't exist for millennial and younger people. Going to a Planned Parenthood rally doesn't necessarily make it my political home. And Planned Parenthood, if I'm a volunteer, doesn't necessarily, and it's no disrespect to these nonprofits, like, they're just doing what they do. But they don't necessarily invest in my political education or get into the weeds with me around why is it that we believe what we believe and how, and is there a place for us to change or grow or transform? And so we want to be that space at Generation Common Good. We also have no intention of ever having full-time paid staff. Everyone is going to either have membership dues or be a volunteer, but we want people out in regular 9-to-5 jobs, not trying to come to parenting as Generation Common Good as like a place for professionalization or credentialing. Like, that's not what we think is going to be a part of building actual true transformative movements in the future. There are way too many I'm a professional activist energy. And so we reject that. And we reject the extractive kind of consumeristic norms that a lot of these pay-for-play nonprofits have been doing.
I'm so glad there's a great essay. I'm sure you know it, but I want to say it out loud for the listeners, viewers, and readers of Redneck Gone Green. And it's called "The Revolution Will Not Be Funded." And it is a scathing indictment over how the nonprofit industrial complex has emerged. And I say that as somebody who is employed by a nonprofit. I say that as somebody who has created nonprofits. And I also want to say this as a revolutionary myself. And that is, I absolutely agree that we need to build institutions. We need to build our own tools, our own formations. And we build those in order to do things, right? But here's the problem. As soon as you create that tool, any type of tool, there's a certain maintenance of that tool that becomes necessary. And here is the potential creative tension. Here is the potential existential crisis. And that is the moment where the needs of the organization that you created become more important than why you created the damn organization to begin with. In other words, just maintaining the organization and meeting payroll and doing all the things that need to be done become more important than the issue that you came up into. So I applaud Generation Common Good being so intentional and thinking about that.
Well, we know that we're going to be poor and we're going to be janky, but those are also a part of our values of understanding that, you know, the trade-off is that we would have to be rewarded with big foundation grants, but we would have to be compliant to them. And they would discourage our ability to engage in radical imagination. And then, of course, there's the whole extracting labor from all of us without really truly redistributing any power. And so decoupling ourselves from those mechanisms, you know, we do still have some grants with really incredible revolutionary thinkers who have wealth and then, you know, invest in us. But for you know, all intents and purposes, any grant money that we get or small donors, small donor donations go straight to programs and giving resources to the organizers.
Well, and the other thing that I'm going to just lift up and I'm going to call out and say, folks ought to always ask yourself, and it's not actually that hard to find, what is the ratio of the pay between an executive director of this nonprofit and the frontline organizers of that nonprofit? And Jasmine, I'm going to tell you, if you do it for any of these big, huge institutional players based out of DC, it is obscene. It is absolutely despicable.
I was a program manager at my first nonprofit job where I was raising $400,000 of peer-to-peer grant, like funding, grassroots funding. And I was on food stamps as a mom of 3 because that's how little I was being paid as a program officer. So I've been at every tier. And even when I stepped into leadership of Uncoke, my campus, I immediately changed our operating protocols that the lowest paid student organizer, that my salary as ED would never go beyond a percentage that student had. And then because of my, and this is not, you know, blowing, I'm not tooting my own horn, but, you know, there are not a lot of people that wanted to fund the kind of radical, clearly naming the problem the way Uncoke did and does. And so when we hit funding jams, unlike other traditional nonprofit projects, I chose not to get a raise or a cost of living raise, even though I had 3 kids, because for me, it felt like that's the responsibility and an act of integrity for any kind of executive leader. But if you look at these other nonprofits like that, they'll cut everybody else and then they'll keep, you know, 2 employees that are 35% of their operating budget. So it's just, you know, it's the same remaking the same kind of extractive free market nonsense that we see with for-profit corporations.
And again, this is the thing, like, to me, we need to build social change agents. We need to encourage that kind of mindset. And again, I'm not trying to, break my arm, patting myself on the back either, Jasmine, but when I was coming up, like in the global justice movement in the 90s, almost none of the folks that were in the streets with me were paid. We were literally doing bake sales and cookie sales in order to fund ourselves to the WTO protest in November of 1999 in Seattle, or to Miami, where we were at the Free Trade Area of the Americas protest, where there was a full-on police riot that erupted in the street, or the IMF protest in New York City, or the World Bank protest in DC. Again, like my passport, my social change passport is very well stamped. And we literally were funding ourselves. And one of the things that I learned, Jasmine, is, okay, it's important to demonstrate and to protest and to be as disruptive as we can be. And I'm really proud that we shut down the city of Seattle during the WTO meeting back then in November of 99. But the other thing I learned was the critical importance of building alternatives. And so this is a way for me to do two things. I want to shift into parenting is political, but I want to give you as much time to talk about that process. And then I want to save some time in the next 15 minutes to talk about the work in Resist and Build and that phenomenal essay you wrote for the Nonprofit Quarterly. So let's shift into parenting is political, because that's another example to me of what I'm seeing you do in the real world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a politicized parent, but in those same ways that my early consciousness came online, whenever I became a parent and then started building out my family and, married Mo, my wife, so much of millennial parent culture is that very consumeristic, the almost like the remaking of all of the things that Reagan was trying to do around like the nuclear family model. And we would go to parenting classes, or we would get parenting resources or look into this coach, and it was just all the same latent messages. And we were just like, we can't find the book that we need to read for the future and well-being of our children and to help us grow and transform as caretakers. And I think maybe it was like Toni Morrison or someone said that if you can't find the book, like you're the person who's supposed to write it. And so for us, we created Parenting is Political as sort of like a bat signal for other parents who understood millennial and younger parents and caretakers, like we're not failing. Like we can't buy a house because of some kind of personal failing. We can't buy a house because it's, there are no social safety nets, and everything about our life has been designed to keep us on these hamster wheels. And so how we translate that kind of consciousness to our young people, what kind of cultures we create. One of the things that I say pretty regularly on our podcast and other spaces is like, no one raises a white supremacist on accident, right? Like you have to do it on purpose. And in order to raise radical and revolutionary free thinking young people, you also have to do that on purpose because of how our society has organized itself and how easy it is to disseminate that like cisgender, heterosexual, nuclear family model. And so, yeah, we created it, and people have been finding us, and we've been finding our people, and we use it as a cultural organizing resource, as a tool for narrative, but we also drive all of the folks who come to us newly politicized into political homes. Sometimes it's Generation Common Good, but usually Generation Common Good's not a fit. And so we've built this really cool network of folks that we really respect and we trust, and we try and point folks into movement spaces where they can continue to do whatever they're wrestling with, whatever brought them to our content and to our stuff. We do critical consciousness raising circles where we read really radical books that a lot of parents wouldn't get access to in the mainstream typically. And it's been a really cool community.
I'm reminded too, again, everybody who knows me and those of you who are longtime listeners, viewers of Redneck Gone Green know I talk about my mama all the time. And I still remember her explaining to me about Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique and how that awakened for her and her sisters and others, and now I know that, Mama was going through political education. She wouldn't
Mhm.
ever have used that language, but that's exactly what it was, Jasmine.
And
Like,
the nuclear family is just such bullshit. Even like the middle, like upper class white families, they don't have nuclear families. Do we know what the divorce rate in the United States is? Come on, y'all. And of course, like we're non-monogamous and we're secular humanists and we're interracial and so we had all of these layers of difference that put us further and further out from the sites of power that quote unquote family as a fiction of the state is supposed to grant you. And so we were like, well, fuck it. Like we're already outsiders. So let's just make this punk rock and turn in parenting is political. And there are a lot of folks that come to us and the most radical thing they feel like they've done was like vote for Obama or knit a pink pussy hat. And we love on those folks. And then we quickly introduce them to like Sophie Lewis and family abolition. or like, we're like, I don't know, maybe you can't pay off your student loan debt, not because you're financially irresponsible, but because of racial capitalism. So we try and make it a really approachable, everyday person can wrestle with these things, but we are pretty hard-lined and militant about where we come from.
I tell people all the time, man, you're not much of an organizer if you can only organize with people who already agree with you, right? But the point is, you take people where they are, but you don't just stay there, right? Hopefully, you have taught me something and maybe I've taught you something. Like hopefully we're coming into deeper consciousness, right? That's the whole point of it. Looky here, Jasmine, our time is running out and I definitely want to give you an opportunity to talk about the phenomenal essay that I saw you write for the Nonprofit Quarterly for some of the work that we are doing together for Resist and Build. That essay is called Our Task Ahead, Reclaiming Revolutionary Struggle in Atlanta and the South.
Yeah. That was a really fun piece to interview elders, movement elders, and luminaries and really learn more of Atlanta's context. But it kind of came out of almost like my petty reaction to some of the struggles that I've experienced inside of social justice and nonprofit spaces. I kept running into this thing where as like a light-skinned Black and Native working class organizer, I would be told by these people who graduated from HBCUs or were quote unquote born into the movement that I wasn't the right kind of fit for social justice work, which was always so confusing to me because I'm like one of the directly impacted people. Like I come from those communities. And so I started getting really curious about the history of movements and who inside movements kind of acted as these professional managerial buffers or agents of the state internally. And Atlanta's a great example of that, right? That they have sort of this Black managerial class that call themselves social justice warriors or even call themselves revolutionaries in some case, but they exist inside of movements to slow actual transformative systems change work in exchange for like paltry, tiny reforms on the way there. And I wanted to talk to folks like Jerome and others who from Project South, who had figured out strategies back then to resist that kind of capture and co-optation and to still organize. And the answer is no different than what it is now, which is that they intentionally resisted philanthropy's money so that they could have the radical imagination and move how they needed to move. But it was a really great, a really great experience reporting on that. And I think that's true for most revolutionary strongholds like Atlanta or Seattle or Oklahoma City. Like you're always going to have folks that are really not interested in changing the system, or they just want to change the pecking order, right? They want women to be the dominant oppressive class, or now they want to be Black people with white masks on, like Fanon taught us. But what did you think about it? I don't even think you said it was great, but great.
No, I did. Well, what I loved about it was the fact that you described not only the history of Atlanta and lessons learned, which by the way, folks, Jasmine Banks, David Cobb, and Shane Knight are all going to be in Atlanta May 2 through 5. And y'all ought to come join us if you can. Saturday and Sunday, there's going to be an incredible lineup of workshops around building cooperatives around racial capitalism. I mean, like, go to that website. And I'm going to ask Chris to drop that onto the lower third, both in the video and also to thank you so much for doing that. resistandbuild.net/ATL-2025. But again, if you are reading online on the Redneck Gone Green Substack, it's there. But the point is, these are going to be highly participatory sessions where there are workshops, and there'll be a World Cafe on Saturday. Highly participatory process, a generative process to say, not just to describe ain't it awful, which, by the way, it's awful, the racist, sexist, class oppressive society, but what are we going to do, y'all? This is the point of all this. And then get this, on Sunday, a carnival beyond capitalism, which will include music and food and a bouncy house for kids and another round of workshops. So the point is, if you can get to Atlanta coming up this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, come and join us. You'll meet Jasmine Banks in person. You can meet Shane Knight, who will be there representing democracy at work. And you'll meet the Redneck Gone Green. I'll be there as well. So, Jasmine, the other thing that I liked about that essay is you talked about the fact that we needed genuine structural change. And you talked about how the existing institutions and the managerial class of the so-called social movement left were not actually advocating for, or didn't. And I don't know if they don't think that we can win it or what, but they are actually not making and implementing the kind of plans that I saw coming out of the more radical Black tradition, the more radical folks of the 60s and 70s. And whether you go, we can go all the way back to the American Revolution, to the trade union movement, go to the abolitionist movement, the women's movement, the queer movement. Let's remember, Stonewall was a riot. At the end of the day, the folks who are actually catalysts for social change are not starting from a liberal position. They're not even starting from a progressive tradition. They're actually coming from, we need systemic transformational change, and we're going to demand it. We're going to educate, agitate, and organize for it. And you captured that in that essay. And I don't think that there's enough of that in those kind of spaces. That's what I thought.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I was trying, I don't think that we necessarily I don't know what they're thinking on a good day, but my assumption is that, there's a real lack of moral courage, and that this moment calls for so many of us to step into, and we really have to shed our dependency on respectability, because it don't matter what kind of respectability you want to play, the boot's still going to be on your neck, to whatever degree, right? And that's what's so sad, is there's kind of like this psychosis they live in, this cognitive dissonance, to think that these, tiny reforms are actually opening up their airways. And it's like, no, you just said, please shift your boot a little bit to the left.
I'm not interested in advocating, this whole, the demand, longer leashes, bigger cages. That's not won't work for me, y'all. No, I'm just too feral.
Yeah.
Look here, Jasmine Banks, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to give you a chance to make sure that folks who are inspired by what you're doing, what you're up to, how can people best follow you?
Yeah, they can check us out on Instagram under Parenting is Political, or follow Generation Common Good. We've got a sign-up form on the landing page, and we open up our membership process in quarters. So you'll hear from me or one of our organizers inviting you into process if you're interested. But yeah, that's it. Or Jasmine at generationcommongood.org.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thanks for coming in, and I'm going to see you in Atlanta soon, lady.
I know. See you soon.
Bye-bye. Hey, Shane, I told you, man, she's a firecracker, eh?
I just learned so much. I feel like I need a nap. There were a couple of things that I want to mention that really stood out to me, like my takeaway from all of this one of the most important things I think that she said that people, I think people don't really understand the concept of what she said when she meant a political home. You know, it's like the old bowling alley days where people used to have a place to go, a third space to go. And the conversations that were had in those places that change things, that help sustain and start movements. And that to me is like, okay, doing that for the digital world, right? Brilliant. All of it. And I know, especially for the millennials and younger generations, that's becoming more and more and more important. And I'm glad to see that somebody who is so capable, experienced, and really driven and motivated to do it is out there doing it. And I'm looking forward to meeting other people like her this weekend too.
All right, y'all. So I'm going to say it one more time. Come with us. If you're able to get to Atlanta this weekend, you'll meet Shane Knight, the co-host of Redneck Gone Green and a chief cook and bottle washer, big shot over at Democracy at Work. You'll meet Jasmine Banks of Generation Common Good. You'll meet the Redneck. You'll meet a lot of other people too. There's several hundred folks that have already registered. Shane, I hope you'll be able to join us, or I hope y'all will join me and Shane next week when we will bring Emily Kawano of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network back onto the program. That's next Monday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, keep on keeping on. Can't stop, won't stop. Peace, y'all.